I'm going to jump right into our announcements. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, which is Tomahawk Live Trap. And if you don't have any traps, or if somewhere down the road you are thinking about purchasing a trap, I recommend you go to livetrap.com. The folks at Tomahawk are fantastic. They're great. Please use that code DCNC23 and you will get 10% off your purchases. So just wanted to make sure that you are aware about that. And Susie Richmond is going to be in the background, and she will be helping answer questions that come through on those questions box. As you watch this presentation, if you have any questions, you just put that in the questions box. Susie will answer those questions, or after the event, all the questions are saved. So if she can't get to you today, she will work through the questions over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll try and have some time at the end for Q&A also. But Susie's back there as sort of the resident expert on TNR. And then we also have Kristen Petrie out there, our technical cat, and she can help you with regards to any technical support questions like I can't see or I can't hear, those kinds of things. All right, so we have Susie Richmond. She is the executive director of Neighborhood Cats. She joined the organization after over 20 years running a major New York City shelter and nonprofit veterinary clinic. At Neighborhood Cats, she has led multiple large targeted TNR projects in New York City and northern New Jersey, managed a program for providing scholarships to veterinarians for training in high volume spay neuter of community cats, and co-authored the Humane Society of the United States online course on TNR in her spare time. She can often be found trapping feral cats on Maui. Brian Cordes is co-founder and national programs director for Neighborhood Cats, a leading community cat advocacy group with hands-on programs in New York City, New Jersey, and Maui. Currently, he and his wife, Susie, live in Hawaii and can usually be found trapping cats or releasing them after they've been neutered. In between stints with Neighborhood Cats, he served as a grants manager for PetSmart Charities, overseeing over $21 million in TNR and spay-neuter projects. He has produced many of the leading educational materials on trap-neuter return, including award-winning books and videos, has assisted numerous communities in setting up large-scale TNR programs, and is a frequent presenter on community cat issues. Brian has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Cornell University and a JD from the University of California at Berkeley. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Okay, thank you, Stacy, and thanks everybody for taking time out today to learn more about trapping for TNR. So we've taken the poll on how much experience you guys have, and there's a lot of it, so that's great. That helps me to know what to focus on and what not to. Stacy mentioned our TNR certification workshop. For really gratifying to see that over close to half of those of you attending today have already taken this workshop. For those who have not, the next one's coming up on Saturday, April 1st, and you can go to that link to register. So that's where we covered kind of the basics of doing trap, neuter, return, and in a lot of depth. So because about half of you have not taken the basic workshop, I spent just a little bit of time in the beginning today covering some of the basics. So those of you who are experts and know all this stuff, just bear with me. It won't be too much time that I spend on this. But if you miss some of the basics, then it doesn't really matter how many advanced tips and things like that you follow. So I just want to cover some basic ground, but the vast majority of today will be spent in the more advanced and esoteric stuff. Also, like Stacy mentioned, make sure you download the slides from the handouts, and that way you don't have to scramble to write down the names of products or copy links or anything like that. You'll just have it right there. And then the other handout is the Neighborhood Cats TNR Handbook, and that's where you can go into kind of any area you're interested in a lot more depth. So if you're interested, you're thinking about, well, what about kittens and how do I trap them and should I trap them and what about their age and where's their mother, and all that stuff is covered in the handbook. So make sure you get that too. Okay, so going into basics, like I say real quick, the number one thing is to have a feeding pattern. And that makes it very predictable for trapping purposes to know where the cats are going to be and when they're going to be there. Plus, it allows you to control the food source, so you can withhold food the day before. So when you're doing a feeding pattern, you want as close as possible to the same time, same place. If you are starting a feeding pattern, pick a time that's good for your trapping. Don't feed them at 2 in the morning if you can feed them at a better time for you. And a tip is to associate the feeding with a unique sound, whether it's jingling your keys or shaking a bag of dry food, a jar of dry food, something like that. And that way, during the trapping, when you've done your initial wave and some of the cats have kind of disappeared, using that sound will help to draw them back out. Okay, hunger is key. All the tricks are important for those really tough cats, and when you've gotten the 9 out of 10 and you're trying to get that 10, but the 9 cats, you're going to get a lot faster if they're hungry. So withhold food for at least 24 to 48 hours and leave out water. Can't emphasize that enough, that you can do everything wrong except if the cats are really hungry, and the vast majority of them are going to go into the trap if they haven't eaten for a couple of days. We talk about mass trapping. That's the approach we prefer when the resources are available to do that. And that's trapping the entire colony of community cats at the same time, rather than just going slowly in a few. So it really depends whether you have these resources available. But if you do and you can mass trap, some of the tips are use more traps than cats. So when you get down to the last ones, you're not using 3 traps to catch 3 cats. You're using 5 or 6. Makes it easier. Give yourself at least a couple of days. 2 kinds of bait. We'll talk a lot more about bait later. Put all the traps out at once. Don't put them out as you're catching cats. You want to walk into the territory as little as possible. Make sure you put the traps against structures. That's a common mistake that people make, is they put the trap out in the middle of the driveway or the middle of the lawn. It looks strange to the cats. Less strange if it looks like it's attached to something familiar, so against the fence, against the side of the house, whatever it might be. And then look for hot spots, and that's just, you're going to put traps out around the feeding area and along pathways that the cats follow to get to the feeding area. And for whatever reason, you're going to find there's a spot or two which is perfect, and they'll just keep going in. And the way you find those spots is in the beginning of a trapping, when you catch cats, take the cat away after they're covered, and then move a fresh trap into that exact same spot. A tip for you is use the caretaker's routine to draw the cats out during the trapping. So that means we like to, you have to judge who you're working with, right? And if they're just too nervous about the whole thing and kind of can't deal with it calmly, then maybe sometimes it's better to ask them to stay home that day. But if you can work with the feeder or the caretaker, that's going to give you a little bit of an edge because the cats are familiar with them. So what we like to do is have the caretaker be there at the, we show up about half an hour before the cat's feeding time and put out our traps and set everything up. And then at the normal feeding time, we have the caretaker show up and go through their normal routine, everything except not actually putting food out, but we try to get them to mimic their motions, like drive up and get out and pour the water and put the bowls out and do everything as if it's a normal feeding. And then also, because that makes the cats more comfortable and more likely to appear. And then during the trapping, if the cats associate the feeding with a sound, having the caretaker use that sound is what's going to be most effective in drawing them back out. So learn what the caretaker's routine is. Just go with them once, maybe before the trapping, and just observe what they do, and then mimic that during the trapping itself. So we spend a fair amount of time during the basic certification workshop going over equipment, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that now. What I want to emphasize today is that if you have a choice of traps and you're doing a lot of trapping, and there's an awful lot of you who are, gravity traps are going to be preferable to what are called spring-loaded traps, and I'll show you a photo of those in a little bit. But what you're seeing here is the True Catch Model 30 LTD. And this trap, the way it works is the cats go in, they step on that trip plate that you can see raised up in front of the bait dish. And then, of course, the door shuts behind them, but it shuts based on gravity, not on a spring. And as a result, it's much quieter when it closes. And that is going to make fewer cats jumpy. So if you're kind of doing this as a pro, you're going to want to start tending towards accumulating gravity traps and not spring-loaded ones. Now, this is a great trap, and it's been a kind of workhorse for the TNR field for many, many years, the True Catch model, but it does have a couple of issues. Two main ones are it doesn't have any locks on it. So once the cat's in there, if the trap gets knocked over somehow, either during transport or in the course of the trapping, doors are going to open and the cat's going to escape. So you have to have carabiners that you use to lock the doors yourself. And then the other disadvantage potentially is that it's possible to set the trap in a way where it takes too much more weight than a cat to force the trip plate to go down. So now if you've used these traps a lot, you're not going to make those mistakes. But if you haven't used them before, you're liable to do that. So we worked with Tomahawk to create a new gravity trap that's called, it's the Neighborhood Cats gravity trap, model GT606. And you can see a picture of it in action. This is actually the very first cat who was caught in one of these traps. You know, we work with Tomahawk to design equipment, and then we go out and test it and refine it. This was the first kitty that we caught. So this is the features of it that we really like. The number one thing is it has an auto lock. So the back door has a clip lock, and the front door automatically locks when it shuts. So there's no worrying about getting carabiners or zip ties or whatever to make sure the doors are closed. It's also, there's one setting on it, so it's you can't set it in a way where it'll require too much weight. There's only one. There's a notch that you put the trigger in, and that's it. And we have found that notch is light enough that at least 9-week-old kittens will set it off. Lighter than that, I can't say. We haven't tested it. Say like a 5 or 6 week old kitten. I don't know if that will work, but your normal 8-week-olds are fine. And the only, I would say, disadvantage to the True Catch is you lose an inch of space behind the trip plate. So you might have to use slightly smaller bait dishes than what you're used to. But anyway, this trap's out on the market. It's been out for a couple of years now. So these are our two favorite traps to use. Now, this is one that some of you may be familiar with and a lot of you may not. And this is called the Roundhouse trap. And it came out just a few years ago. And the idea behind it, the inventor of the trap, made this because he didn't like that cats sometimes get what we call trap burn when they're caught in a normal trap. And that's when they get kind of frantic and are trying to get out, and they may rub their nose or bang their nose against the metal. And I'm sure those of you who are experienced have seen that. They scrape their nose, and it looks a lot worse than it is, but still, the inventor of this trap wanted to try to eliminate that. So the trap is round, and then there's a plastic coat, not a coating, but a layer on the inside of the trap. So the cat is, when they're trapped, they're going to be pressed against the plastic, not against the metal. It's a little problematic because, as I'll show you, once you've caught the cat, you have to transfer him out, at which point they're exposed to the wire frame on the top and bottom, and they can get trap burn then. So I don't really personally see the trap burn thing as a strong reason to shell out some extra money to get this trap. The reason that we've used it is because it's different. It has the potential to attract a cat that wouldn't go into a normal box trap, but maybe they'll go into this because it's shaped differently. You can see it's kind of darker inside. Some cats may just be more curious because it's of its shape. So it just gives one more option for your cats to go in. And the way the trap works is the front, so you see the opening that the cat would go in, what we would normally call the front door, but I don't know what you call it on a round trap. It's the door, the doorway. The door itself is pushed into the trap, and the bait dish is attached to the door, but behind it. So, and then underneath the bait dish is the trip plate. So basically the cat has to walk in, go around the front door to get to the bait, and in the process of going around it, the cat will step on the trip plate and the front door slams shut, and they're trapped inside. So it's very clever. Like any trap, you're going to need to cover it right away. And like I say, we've started to bring this now on trappings in order to just give more choices. So here's what happens is once you've caught the cat, you're going to cover the trap just like any other trap. Then you have to tilt it sideways. This is where it starts getting awkward because you've got a cat in there, right? So you have to kind of do this gently and slowly. And there is a stand, so the trap's not going to roll around. You tilt it up so it's on its stand. And then you're going to do a transfer. But before I show you the transfer, let me note that. So what happens when you tilt the trap at this point? So not only does the cat kind of get flipped a little bit, but all the bait in the bait dish comes pouring out. I think a screen of some type would be a nice addition to this equipment, but it's not there right now. So what we do is we use dry food. You don't want to use like really saucy, lots of gravy, because it's going to get all over the cat when it falls out. So a better idea is to use dry food like soaked in tuna, something where if it falls, it's just going to bounce right off the cat and not cause cleanliness problems in that way. So once the trap is tipped, it's got this door that's on the top when you're setting the trap, and then now it's on the side once you've tipped it over. And you're going to do a transfer just like you would out of a drop trap. So you use the clips to attach your box trap, the rear of your box trap with the sliding rear door onto the roundhouse trap. Pull up both doors, pull away the sheet to get the kitty to go from light to dark. Same routine. The trap also, it doesn't double as a cage. It's you can't really use it beyond the actual trapping itself. So you're going to have box traps with you if you're using the roundhouse trap. So trap mats, those of you who've taken the basic workshop are familiar with them. For those who have not, this is that what you see the kitty stepping on at the front of the trap. And The reason to have trap mats is because, number one, they make the surface of the floor of the trap much more inviting. So, you know, cats are very sensitive creatures, and stepping on a nice soft surface as opposed to a wire frame is just going to be more attractive and less concerning to them. And then also, as you can see in this slide, you can put a trail of bait that goes back to the dish in the back rear of the traps, and a lot of these cats will just slowly follow the trail until they get to the trip plate. So there's two, you can use cardboard to do the same thing as trap mats. The problem is then you have to cut them up every time you go trapping. They're just single use. If you're doing cardboard, if you use the material that you're seeing here, you can wash it and reuse it. So there's two ways to get these trap mats. You can order them pre-cut from Tomahawk at livetrap.com. That can get a little pricey if you've got a lot of traps. If you just have 2 or 3, then it's not a big deal, maybe to spend the $20 on each mat. But if you got a lot of traps, what you want to do is get a giant roll of this stuff and get a yardstick and a good pair of scissors or a paper cutter and just slice them up yourself. It doesn't have to be an exact cut. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a little uneven. It doesn't have to be the perfect length. And the way you would do that is click on this link, go to amazon.com and do a search for what you see there, the metallic PVC flooring. And you can get, what we recommend is get the 8-foot by 4-foot roll. And last time I looked, it was going for about $90, although you always have to double check prices these days. But you can get at least a couple of dozen mats out of these rolls, so you'll get your cost down to about $3 or $4. Just a quick tip for those of you who trap in the wintertime, you have the advantage of seeing paw prints. And like we talk about, when you're setting your traps, you're setting them around the feeding area in any paths of travel that the cats normally take. And you can use snow to see if there are any patterns in their tracks and learn if there are paths that you can use even after the snow is gone to set traps during a trapping. So use when there's a nice fresh snow. Go out, maybe take your camera, take some shots, and see if there are trails of paw prints. Okay, so now we're going to get into hard to catch cats. We've kind of covered the basics, and these guys are the ones who you've taken the TNR certification workshop, you've done everything you're supposed to do, and they just won't go in. So, you have a kitty like this one in the slide where you can see all the other cats in the background who are in their traps and covered, and she's not interested. So how do we get these guys? Our number one tool that we use is the drop trap, and that's what you're seeing in this slide. Basically, cat psychology is such that they don't like going into a narrow, confined space like a regular box trap that we've been showing you. So that's why they need to be hungry. If you need to make them extra hungry to overcome their natural wariness of entering, the desire for the bait is more powerful. But and that's also why we do lots of these tricks and stuff, is to try to entice them to go into that box trap that they really don't, if they weren't hungry, and not that many of them would bother, would think it was worthwhile. But with the drop trap, they're not going into it, they're going under it. And the vast majority of cats have no natural fear of that. So you don't have to make them extra hungry. And this is a good tool, not only for hard to catch cats, but if you have a situation where you have an uncooperative feeder, so you can't get them to stop, no matter how much you talk to them about it, and maybe whatever, there are some difficult personalities out there that way. So what you have to do is learn the pattern of their feeding. And you go out there before, like an hour before their normal feeding time, and set up this drop trap. And as long as the cats haven't eaten yet that day, they're going to go in. And you can just use their normal food, maybe a little bit of extra something smelly, but most of the cats are just going to walk right under, and you'll have an opportunity to catch them. So, but for cats that won't go into box traps, it's a great tool for if there's one cat left in the colony, then you put a giant bowl of bait in the back and you wait, let everybody go in and have a bite until the cat that you're after finally goes in. If you're trying to catch a mom and her kittens at the same time, you can wait until they're all under the trap if you've got an injured cat, things like that. So it's a fantastic tool. And it's such a good tool that we have a whole webinar on it, similar to today's webinar. It's a 2-hour long training that's going to be on Saturday, June 24th. If you don't want to wait till then, there's a recording of the drop trap webinar that we did last year in 2022 up on the Community Cats podcast website. So you can check that out. And the first hour is kind of going over the basics. And the second hour is much more advanced stuff, like how do you catch 6 or 7 cats at the same time or more. You can use multiple drop traps and catch, the most we've caught was 13 at a time using 3 different drop traps simultaneously. Things like how to use the side door, remote controls, stuff like that. So there's something for people who are beginners and people who are advanced. So check this out, because like I say, it's the #1 thing that we'll go to when we have a cat that is not going into a regular trap. In fact, we always have a drop trap with us when we do a regular trapping, because there's always a couple of cats who, are not going in for whatever reason, but they're still hanging around. So rather than, okay, we'll come back tomorrow, before we leave, we'll set up a drop trap, and usually at least 1 or 2 of them will go under, and we'll catch them right then and there. If you don't have a drop trap available and you're trying to pick out one cat, or maybe you're trying to catch a litter of kittens, and you're afraid if you set the trap and you got a spring-loaded trap like this one here, you might be concerned that a kitten's going to step on the trip plate, another one's going to get hit by the front door. So if you're picking a cat out, or you're trapping kittens, you can prop the front door on a bottle, half full 1-liter water bottle, tie a string around it, and you pull and control when the trap shuts manually, rather than using the trigger and having it shut whenever a cat steps on the trip plate. So just to emphasize one thing with this, which is it's a great technique, but don't try pulling the bottle for the very first time in your life when the cat you're after is in the trap. Set it up ahead of time, yank it a couple of times so that you get a little muscle memory, and then when you're out in the field, you won't risk that moment of hesitancy in which a cat can escape. Now, if sometimes, even the drop trap is not going to work for you, and I'm going to kind of go over a case study here where that was the situation. So you see in this is an aerial view of a condominium complex in Maui. That blue you see on the left, that's the pool on top of a parking garage, and then where the red circle is a bunch of thicket of trees that you can see are along a path that goes past the garage and into the condominium complex. And there was a colony of cats that were being fed in that thicket of trees. And so we came and did everything we're talking about. We set up our traps around the feeding area and along the paths we knew they were coming to. And we got all the cats except for one. And this cat's name was Silver Bob. And the problem with Silver Bob was that we would be walking up the path with our equipment. She would see us and she would take off and she wouldn't come back, not until we were gone. So we couldn't set up a drop trap because we would have just been staring at empty space. She would, obviously you need the cat to be around if you're going to use a drop trap. So we tried for several days because she was pregnant, but we couldn't get her. So once the caretaker informed us that she had given birth, well, then we knew, okay, we've got 5 to 6 weeks before the kittens are going to be old enough to separate from her and still be old enough to eat on their own, but young enough to easily socialize. So we said to ourselves, let's use that 5 or 6 weeks to train this cat to go into a trap. And this is how we went about it. So this is the setup. And a lot of, your setup is going to vary a little bit according to the circumstances that you're working in. But basically, you're going to take a trap and position it at least 10 feet away from where they normally feed. And then you can camouflage it. That's optional. You don't have to, but in this situation, she was so trap shy, we decided we wanted to make the trap look as little like a trap as possible and also blend in with the foliage. So we wrapped the trap in this green sunshade material that you see, and tied it on there with zip ties and stuff like that. Then we zip tied the front door into an open position, right? So there's no way the front door could close. And then we removed the rear door. And removing the rear door was really kind of a safety thing, so that if anybody came along and saw this piece of equipment, it would be useless to them. So, and nobody could use the trap to try to, improperly catch somebody. Sorry, a little cat action in the background there. So then one thing that we didn't do that you want to remember to do is, especially if this is training is going to take place over a lengthy period of time, is make sure you put a mat or a piece of cardboard on the floor of the trap. Because as the cat is going in more and more into the trap, and you're putting food in there, it's going to get really messy, and you want to be able to pull out the mat and the cardboard and keep the floor clean. Otherwise, you're going to get potentially 1 or 2 or more weeks worth of crud in there. So if you're putting the trap in a publicly accessible location, try to make it as the less visible, the better. And what we did here was, because it was along this public pathway, you can see that bicycle lock. We chained the trap onto a tree. Now, you really have to be very careful about doing this in a publicly accessible place. Like, I wouldn't do this in a Walmart parking lot. But this was a private condominium complex that people walking by probably wouldn't notice, and if they did, they were vacationers and owners of condos, so it was unlikely that they would do anything to disrupt it. So now that you're all set up, you're going to start feeding the cat in her normal spot, and the normal spot is far enough away from the trap that she can see the trap, but it's not going to stop her from coming for her meal and eating. And of course, she's comfortable with her feeder. So, she doesn't run away from the feeder. She just runs away from everybody else. So you start feeding the cat a distance that the cat considers safe away from the trap. And ideally, you want to use whatever bowl that they are used to eating out of. So that's what you see. This is Silver Bob, and you can see her eating out of her normal stainless steel bowl. But we made a mistake that you'll see in these photos, and we kind of forgot that a few weeks down the line, that bowl was going to have to go into the back of the trap and fit behind the trip plate. And obviously this one is way too big. So what we ended up doing was, when it was time to set the trap, we used a smaller stainless steel bowl in the hope that that wouldn't throw her off, that it would be familiar enough, and it worked. But it would have been a lot smarter to have, in the course of training her to go into the trap, to also have used, trained her to eat out of a smaller bowl. So maybe what we could have done was put her a smaller bowl inside the larger bowl or next to the larger bowl, and then kind of stop putting food in the big one and only put the food in the small one. But we could have trained her to do that and not have taken that chance when we got to the end. So think about, as you're training, what she's eating out of. You're going to want it to work as a bait dish as well. So what happens is, once she's eating comfortably, then you're going to move the bowl a foot or two. So you can see the original spot of the bowl in the background there. So, and we were able to go slower in this process because we had 5 or 6 weeks. So each time she's eating, she's comfortable, she's eaten there for a couple of days, you move the bowl a foot or two closer to the front of the trap. So in this is probably a couple of weeks later, and you can see she's just a foot in front of the front door of the trap, and she's eating quite comfortably at this point. Do the same process when you actually reach the trap. You start to slowly move it into the trap. So at first, just put it just inside, and then as she gets comfortable again, you move it a little bit further in. And you can see she's starting to go in. Now here, at this point, she's all the way in, her body is all the way into the trap. Now, if you remove the rear door, then this is when you know you're ready to set the trap, because you don't want to go all the way to the back and be putting the bowl back there, because she might figure out to walk around and come in through the rear door, which isn't there anymore, and not have to go all the way into the trap to eat. So now, if you haven't removed the rear door, if you're in a safe enough situation, you didn't have to do that, you would continue the training process until the bowl was all the way in the back. But in this case, this was the goal, was to get her whole body in the trap, the bowl about the middle of the trap, around the trip plate, and that was, we figured, was going to be far enough. So she was ready for us to trap her at this point. We just had to wait for her kittens to show up, and there they are. They were spotted, and you can tell visually they're about 5-6 weeks old, plus we knew when she had given birth. So at that point, we decided we would catch the mom first, and then we would go for the kittens. And that's a tough choice, but we didn't want to freak her out after all this training by grabbing the kittens and then having her kind of get upset with us. So we figured, let's get her first. So we set the trap, and then sure enough, we got her. So and then we did wrangle up the rest of the kittens. One of them was really tough and took several days, but we did get them all. So this kind of trap training, this process that we just went through, it doesn't have to be reserved only for difficult cats, but you can use it for normal trappings if you have the right circumstances. So for example, if someone's feeding an 8-cat colony in their backyard, and you can safely leave the traps out there, then maybe a week or two before the trapping, put 8 traps in the yard and leave them there, and start to feed them with 8 small bowls. Same idea, a safe distance away from the traps. And then over the course of the week or two, gradually move the bowls closer and closer until they're going all the way in. The day before the trapping, you maybe just give them a quarter. You don't want to break the routine, so you don't want to just withhold food altogether. So give them about a quarter of their normal portion. And by now they're going all the way into the trap to get it. So they'll be hungry. You want them to be a little bit extra hungry just in case on the day of the trapping. And then just remember that you should only do this in a secure setting. But we have seen people do this where they've trained a backyard colony to eat out of the traps. The day of truth, they just set the traps and bing, 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 they get all 8 cats pretty quickly. You're gonna want the traps spread out at that point, so they may not all step on the plate exactly at the same time. So a little bit of distance between the traps will help one from getting scared and running off. And you may not catch all 8. In our example, we have seen all 8 caught, but you'll probably get most of them pretty quickly, and then you'll have to go about normal trapping for the rest. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that I clarify one thing, which is when I was talking about withholding food for 24 to 48 hours, it says on the slide, leave out water. And it was pointed out to me that that could be misinterpreted. What I mean is keep water out. I don't mean leave it as in take it away. So there should always be water available to the cats at all times. Okay, so moving along. We talked about, camouflaging the trap in terms of trap training, but you can use camouflage during a regular trapping as well. And this slide is actually another trap training, because you can see the rear door was taken away, but there's no reason you can't do this and keep the rear door on and set the front door. And you can see how well this trap blends into the scenery, and that can be real important with these tricky cats. Another way to camouflage the trap is to put it inside of a cardboard box. And that's why when the traps, when you order a new trap, keep the box, because that can be really handy. You can just, take away the top cover of the trap, of the box, the top folds where the front door would be, put the trap inside the box and just set the trap. And that might make it much more inviting. You could put it under a bush, behind a board, anything to kind of disguise it and make it look like it's part of the scenery. So you can see that's a big theme when we're talking about trapping, is trying to blend in the traps as best you can. Now, the reason we don't do this with every single trap is because you don't need it for every single cat. Most cats, if you follow the basics and they're hungry, you're going to be able to catch them. And these tricks are for the ones that are more difficult. So we tend to, at Neighborhood Cats, we wait until we get down to those difficult cats before we start doing all this fancy stuff. And it's just more efficient. It takes less time that way. So this is another way you can disguise a trap, which is to take a contractor bag, like a lawn trash bag, and wrap it around the trap. Make sure the front and rear doors are open. The reason the rear door is open is because it's always important for the cat to be able, unless the trap is disguised, you want the cat to be able to see out the back and give less of a sense of there's only one way out. So another thing is this is a great way to deal with the rain. So if you're at a location where the cats are sheltered not far from where you're trapping, not far from the feeding area, and they might come out a little bit, and maybe it's not, pouring really hard, but the traps and the bait are going to get wet if you just leave them out. This is a great way to continue to trap in slightly even somewhat normal rain, depending on how far the cats have to go before they get to the bait. So talking about bait dishes, another tip for you is to use what are called food boats, and that's the what you see being held in this slide. That's, we often call them French fry plates, but if you go online, they're called food boats or food trays, and get one that, depending on the trap you're using, is going to fit behind the trip plate. Now, if it's windy, you might be worried about these things blowing around. So you just take a piece of duct tape and stick it on the bottom of the food boat, and then press that down against the floor of the trap, and it will stay in place. Another thing you can do is take a clothespin and attach the boat to the side of the trap in the back. Now, you've noticed that those of you who've done a lot of trapping have probably observed this, how the cats, when you first put the traps out and they first show up, they gravitate towards the back of the trap. And again, that has to do with their natural wariness of going into it. So the first thing they're going to do is try to figure out, can I get to the tasty tuna without going into the trap? So they tend to hang out towards the rear. So there's a way to take advantage of this tendency, and that's like so, which is to take two traps and put them side by side, with one facing one direction and one facing the other, so that when the cats go back to check out the bait at the back of one of the traps, they're right next to the front door of the other one. And there's sometimes that will trick them into going all the way in to the one. Also notice that kind of a basic thing, but just in case you're not familiar with it, notice how we have sheets tucked into the handles of the traps. And that's, so, obviously TNR 101 is, the cat gets trapped. You want to cover the trap right away to calm the cat down. But if the sheet is already there tucked into the handles, you don't have to go running around trying to find a sheet or running back and forth. It's right there for you. The only time we wouldn't do this is if it's breezy out, because you don't want cloth flapping around on top of the trap and potentially scaring a cat away. So this is less of an issue these days because trip plates are now much longer, wider than they used to be, and it's hard for the cats to step over them. But if you've got a cat who has figured out to step over the trip plate, or if you have an older trap that has a small trip plate, you can extend it with a piece of cardboard. That's what we recommend you do. You get a piece of cardboard the width of the trap, about 6 inches long, and tape it to the middle of the trip plate. Now you'll have the proper size trip plate. But if you've got a cat who somehow has figured that out, this is one way to catch them. So what you're doing is you're covering the trip plate a few inches in front of it and in the back of it, and it's buried. The cat can't see it, right? It's underneath that newspaper. So just in front of the trip plate, you're going to take something like this wooden rod that you see in this slide, and a couple inches up off the ground, you're going to slide it all the way through the trap so it's sticking out the other end. So you basically created a bar that the cat has to high step over in order to get to the bait. They can't see the trip plate, so when they come down over the bar, they're gonna step on it. So it's a great trick. It actually does work. As I say, these days, now that we have traps with bigger plates, we don't need to do this very often, but just in case. Also, another thing to keep in mind is if you have a cat that has somehow gotten to the bait dish and evaded the trip plate, what you don't want to do is run over or make a lot of noise, scare the cat out of the trap, because you want to give yourself an opportunity to set something like this up, right? So this is what would happen is we wouldn't start out, like I say, we try to do the least amount of work, not the most. So we wouldn't start out putting a trap out like this. But if we observe a cat who's evaded the trip plate, what you do is you walk towards the trap, but very slowly, so that the cat has plenty of time to see you from a distance. Sometimes as he backs out, they'll step on the trip plate. If they don't, they're not panicked by you running over or making a loud noise. They have plenty of time to just calmly walk away, and then you can kind of play with the trap like this, and they're much more likely once you step away from the trap to come back over and try again. Whereas if you panic them, it's unlikely they're going to come back. Okay, indoor trapping. So I always like to say that if I can get a cat inside a space, then I've got them. It's just going to take a lot more work potentially, but once they're in a space and the windows are closed and they can't get out, you're going to catch this cat if you know how to do it. This is how you do it. So you're going to take a trap. First, you need a board of some type. This is actually what you're seeing there is a large piece of cardboard. Looks like a cardboard box that got flattened. You can use a piece of plywood. You can put it behind the couch, whatever it might be. You want to put the trap behind something, and then the psychology of this is so you're in the space, you're in a shed, and the cat is hiding somewhere, right? You want to flush him out of his hiding space and give him only one place to go and hide somewhere else, and that's going to be where the trap is. So you put the trap behind something, and then you can see in picture number 2 on the right, you're covering the openings with a sheet or a blanket or something like that. So it's obviously that if the cat wanted to, they could break through your sheet, but what's happening is they're moving very quickly. The only daylight they're going to see when they go behind this board is the back of the trap, and they're not going to they're going to assume they can't get through the sheet. So they're going to follow the path, what they think is the path of least resistance, and that's going to be the daylight in the back of the trap. So you just need to visually block all the openings. You don't have to actually block them. So once you're set up in number 2 and the front door is set, your trap is now set, you need to look around the room and ask yourself, well, where else can the cat hide? And make that inaccessible. Either remove it or block it off. Again, wherever the cat is, you want to leave them there for now, but you want to make it so the only place they can run and hide quickly is where you have your trap. So once you're all set up, you've blocked off the other hiding spaces, then you do it very carefully, get with a broomstick, so you're maintaining some type of distance or maybe a loud noise, and flush your cat out of where they're hiding, and then just stand back and watch. They'll go run, try to find a place to hide, and 9 times out of 10, they'll go running right into the trap, and you'll catch them. We've done this sometimes with putting traps in closets, dark closets, and try to block off the space to the side and at least a little bit above the front door, and that's been successful too. So just keep that in mind. The psychology of the cat is, I need a dark, safe place to hide. So you trick them into thinking where the trap is that dark, safe place. Okay, we talked about what your favorite bait is, and not surprisingly, the number 1 bait was fish, and that's because cats really do tend to go for that. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that not all cats like fish. I've had a few, and that's why when I talked about mass trapping, we recommend you always use 2 kinds of bait in your bait dish, never just one, because you will occasionally find a cat who doesn't like the fish or likes one but not the other. Hopefully they like both. Don't be afraid to experiment. We've used here in Maui, Spam is a very popular dish with the local population, and we figured, well, why not? We'll give it a try. It turns out the cats love Spam, so we often use that as one of our trapping baits. If you use Spam, just be aware that it's like it, must be made with glue or something like that, because it really sticks together. And we've had, when we first started using Spam under a drop trap, we would have a cat go under and grab like half the can and pull it out of the trap and then eat it outside. So we learned that you really have to squish it up and break it up. So be careful that, like if you're using KFC or something, roasted chicken, make sure it's torn up into smaller pieces so they can't just, grab a drumstick, bolt away, and then eat on their own. But basically, anything that's really pungent and juicy is a good thing to try. In the poll, we mentioned you can try herbal stuff. So catnip, silvervine is another herb that cats really enjoy. And then there's a substance called, it's an herbal thing called valerian root. It's often used in very small amounts, like in children to help them go to sleep, or even adults. It's incredibly smelly. I mean, it stinks, but the cats love it. And if you put a few drops on your trip plate or underneath your bait dish, you have a good chance of attracting them just with that smell alone. So, think about using a scent. And then there is the old adage that a lot of trappers have found successful, which is just to use what the cats normally eat, because that's familiar to them, and familiarity, as we've said many times, is a good thing when it comes to trapping. My own experience is that using what they normally eat is usually pretty successful with a drop trap, because they're not afraid to go under the drop trap, but they need a little extra motivation to go into a normal trap. So we might put their regular food plus a little bit of tuna, something that's a little bit more, enticing than what they're normally used to, so they'll overcome that wariness. If you're having trouble with ants, so it's a summer day and maybe you're in a field or on the sidewalk next to a grassy area, and boom, the ants, they can smell, or whatever it is they do, that tuna too. Well, this is the way you keep ants and bugs out of your bait, which is you create a little moat by putting your bait dish. You can see here, this was from a baby food. It's a baby food container inside a plastic lid that you get, for little aluminum baking trays that you can get at the grocery store, and put just a little bit of water in the plastic lid, and then put your bait dish inside that. And now you've created a moat, and ants can't cross water, and you'll be ant free for the rest of the trapping. It's also a good idea for normal feeding if you've got a problem with ants at all. Put their food bowls inside. We'll use like a cookie pan, a cookie tray, and put a quarter inch of water in it, and then put their food bowls on the tray. So it's no problem for them to lean over and eat out of their regular bowls, but this way the insects can't get to the food. So I was talking about scents. This is an unusual one, but it has been done, and it can be very successful. And this is specifically for tomcats, like this big guy who you can see is not too pleased at having been captured. So this is what it is it's urine from a female in heat. Okay, now that's getting really esoteric, but basically a female in heat, their urine will have an odor that is really attractive to unaltered male cats. So the way you would get this is at a spay-neuter clinic that expresses female cats' bladders before the surgery. So that's what a lot of them do. in order to make sure the bladder is not swollen and won't get nicked by the scalpel during the spay surgery. Once the cat is sedated, they'll hold the cat up over a bucket and then squeeze their bladder to make sure there's no urine inside of it. So they can tell once the cat's knocked out whether she's in heat or not, and they can collect in a vial or small bottle of some sort. They can actually collect that urine for you, and then you put it like on a rag or a piece of paper towel, and put that in your trap or under your drop trap. And if you're after that tomcat who's just been really elusive, there's a very good chance he's going to smell that and be highly attracted to it. So it's a tricky one because first of all, it's hard to get, right? And then it has to be less than 24 hours old or it loses its potency. So probably the best way to go about this is, you have that tomcat out there who just, shows up once, walks by your traps, and then you don't see him for the rest of the night. Ask your spay neuter clinic to keep their eye out, and then when they've got the female in heat, to put some of the urine in a vial and let you know, and then you go into action rather than schedule a trapping and then hoping that the day before they end up being able to get this for you. You adjust to the clinic rather than vice versa. Okay, other kinds of scent that you can use to attract the cats to the traps. Here's a few ideas. I don't know if they make pounce anymore, but they do make, crumbly treats, and that's what you don't want, like a really hard cat treat. You want one that crumbles up really easily, and then you can make a trail from several feet away leading up to the front of the trap and then into the trap. Another thing you can use is fish oil, and that's what you see on the upper right. Bring a little awl or a safety pin with you. Don't buy a bottle of fish oil because it'll go bad. What you want to do is buy a little bottle of capsules, so you can just pull one out, and, poke it, and then spray it. Again, a few feet in front of the trap, and then going into and through the trap. Another idea is, especially if you need to lubricate your traps, make sure that everything's in working order, use a Crisco spray, a butter spray, and that it will just be an extra scent. In addition to kind of oiling your traps, it's an extra scent that will attract the cats. And then there's catnip spray, which is the Kong Naturals. The trick with that is don't overdo it. Don't drown them in catnip, just a little bit. I made a mistake once of putting powdered catnip in front of sprinkling it in front of a trap, and it worked to get the cat over, but then she just rolled around on the ground for a while and then walked away. So don't put too much in. Okay, going from smells to sounds. This is a great trick that we use all the time. And there's a variety of YouTube videos that you can ring up on your phone. If you want to get extra volume on it, you can buy like what you see in this slide, which is a little speaker that plugs right into your phone and will greatly amplify the sound. And the sounds you can use are listed here. Kittens crying for their mom. This is great when you've caught the kittens and now you're trying to catch the mother. But vice versa, if you've caught the mom and you're trying to catch the kittens, or even if you're just trying to catch the kittens, play a YouTube video of the mom calling. The sound of a cat in heat, caterwauling, will attract tomcats. And then you have your favorites, a mouse squeaking or a bird crying. And the sounds work really, really quite well. The one important tip for you though is have a menu of these prepared before you need them. So what you don't want to do is be out there scrolling through dozens of YouTube videos to find one that's more than 30 seconds long. So have them ready to go so you can call them up real quick when you need them, because there's some great ones, but you don't want to be spending your time looking for them while you're out there in the field. So just to give you an example of how great this trick is, this is a little kitten, Violet, who we found in we were working in a hotel, on the grounds of the hotel, and then when we showed up one day, some of the people who worked there brought us a laundry basket with this little kitten inside. And you can actually use the kittens themselves as bait, put them in a carrier under a drop trap, or I'm going to show you how you can use a regular trap. But she was too weak. We had to feed her immediately. So she was too weak to use as bait herself. So her mom was in the basement of the hotel in this giant storage room with, hundreds of mattresses and beds and desks and furniture. There's absolutely no way we were going to be able to, find her in there. But we, obviously knew she had a kitten that she cared about. So we set up a drop trap, and we put my iPhone under, I do advise, have a good case for your phone, just in case. But I put my phone under the drop trap and played a video of a kitten crying for her mama. And it was like immediate. The mom came racing over on top of all the mattresses and, was wondering, where's my kitten? Where's my kitten? Went under the drop trap, and boom, we caught her. So it can be a very powerful tool. Now, I talked about using kittens for bait on a normal trap, or you can use a mom as bait for the kittens, either way. And what you're doing is you're going to put, let's say you're using kittens to catch the mom, you're going to put the kittens in a carrier and put the front door of the carrier right behind the rear door of the trap, just like you see in this slide. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. Then you're going to cover the carrier and the back of the trap with a sheet. So mom hears the kittens crying or smells them, and visually the only way that she can get to them is through the trap, or the only way the kittens can get to the mom is through the trap. And there's a very, very good chance that that's going to happen. So you can definitely do this, or like I say, you can put the carrier. It's a little trickier with the drop trap. We kind of go over that in the drop trap webinar. What you want to make sure is if you're using the kittens as bait, you want to limit the amount of time. You don't want them in there crying for more than 15 or 20 minutes or something like that. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Don't leave them out too long. Try again the next day if you have to. Another thing with kittens, let's say you can't monitor the trap, you can't use the bottle and string technique because of the, just where the trap is located. You don't have a sight line where you have to leave it. And this is best, like, let's say there's one kitten you're after ideally, and you just have to set the trap normally, but you're concerned that the kittens are too small to set the trap off. You can do what's called setting the trigger lightly. And what you're seeing in this slide is an overhead view of a spring-loaded trap that has a trigger on the front door, and that's that hook you see in the middle, and it's resting underneath that brass cylinder. So normally the trigger, you would set it so that the elbow of the hook is resting against the brass cylinder, right? But what you're seeing in this slide is that the very tip of the hook is resting against the cylinder. And what that does is it makes it require a lot less weight or going on the trip plate to shut the front door. So when you're just trapping kittens and you're concerned about that, then and you have spring-loaded traps, do this. You can do the same thing with a true catch trap. Those gravity traps, the brown gravity traps, they have two crossbars that normally you would put at a 90-degree angle to each other when you're setting the trigger. Instead, set it so that the tips of the crossbars are resting against each other, and that will require a lot less weight too. So you don't normally want to do this if there's a lot of adult cats you're after, because it really puts it on a hair trigger, and an adult cat might set the trap off too soon. So this is specifically for trapping kittens. Let's talk about gadgets. There's a whole bunch out there. So headlamps are great. They for nighttime trapping, keeps your hands free. Binoculars for obvious reasons. Stacy mentioned the trail cameras. These are great for monitoring an area ahead of time before trapping, so you can tell exactly how many cats are out there and which ones you've got and how many more are left. The clear rear door is a great tool. We've often used that. It basically fools the cats into thinking that there's two ways into the trap and two ways out, and that makes them a lot less hesitant to go in, and it really works quite remarkably well. The problem is that it can work a little too well, and once they're caught, they continue to think that's a way out, and they can really kind of bash themselves against that rear door trying to escape. So we only use these when we have a sight line to the trap and can quickly cover it when a cat is caught. We wouldn't just like put these out randomly and check them every half an hour or something like that, because you could really get an injured cat that way. But if you're able to keep your eyes on the trap, you can order one of these from Tomahawk to fit one of their standard size traps. And then there's the laser pointer, and the way you use those is like so. You're basically, it's a toy. It works best with kittens, but sometimes you can get adults interested too. Like they're around the trap, but they won't go in it or too close to it. So you start to point the laser pointer on the ground or on the fence near them and get them interested in chasing it. And sometimes you can run them right into the trap, but at least you can get them to come in that direction, and then hopefully your bait will take over at that point. Night vision goggles are something that we've been looking at recently, and that's basically, they're not really binoculars. They work this way. They give you a video screen, and the night vision is from they send out an infrared, and they work quite well. We've used them in pitch black conditions, and you can see the cats moving around, and it's great for just monitoring what's going on. It's particularly good with a drop trap because you're going to put a light on the drop trap and you can see when a cat goes under it, but you can't tell if you're in pitch black whether there's somebody near it. So these night vision goggles will allow you to monitor who's around. But also, even in a regular trapping, it's still good if it's in the dark. It's always good to know what's going on and if there are cats around and how are they behaving, and do you need to dip into your bag of tricks to try to catch any of them. So really don't have a brand to recommend yet because we've only had this one and haven't compared it to others. But if you're interested, this brand is FVTGA. So Frank, Victor, Tom, George, Allen. FVTGA is the brand name. It's got a lot of good reviews. Infrared does work real good. You can also take a video and still photos with it too. So it's pretty cool that way. Let's talk a little bit about animals and wildlife that you may have to deal with. So, and what do you do if you trap a raccoon, like you see here? And you find them in the most unexpected places sometimes. We were trapping on a scaffolding in Upper Manhattan, trying to catch a cat, and lo and behold, we trapped a raccoon who had wandered over from the local park looking for a free meal. So, they're very cute animals, as you can see, but they can be quite dangerous because they have very long claws, and their hands are almost as dexterous as a human's, meaning they can grip onto things. They can reach through the bars with very long claws and very long fingers. And if you get scratched, you're in trouble because you're going to have to get prophylactics treatment, a series of shots to make sure that you haven't caught rabies. And then, the raccoon's life is going to be in danger too at that point. So what you want to do is don't get anywhere within reach of the raccoon. Throw a blanket over it if you can, or a sheet, something to give a little bit of protection, and then put a broomstick, slide a broomstick through the handles of the trap, and have one person on each end and lift the trap that way and carry the trap that way, so you're never within arm's reach of the raccoon. And you can see how you can use a trap divider to section him off on one end, and then you open the door on the other and just kind of let him amble out. So they're very gentle creatures in general, but you really don't want to get scratched. Skunks, the way you handle them, because obviously you do not want to get sprayed. They spray from their anal glands. So it's when their rear end is facing you, that's when you're in danger. But keep in mind that just before they spray, they'll warn you by stamping their feet. So if you've got a skunk in the trap whose rear end is facing you and he's stamping his feet, do not proceed further. Wait until they're a little calmer. The best way to handle them is with a heavy blanket that you can actually approach them from the front, not from the back. But while their rear end is not facing you and you're as far away as you can be, you throw the heavy blanket over the trap, and that way you're protected from getting sprayed. Pull the blanket back long enough to open the rear door, and again, just step back and let them move out at their own pace. Possum are another common animal that ends up in cat traps. They're extremely gentle animals. They're really animals you don't have to worry about in terms of them being around your colony or sleeping in cat shelters or things like that. They're quite peaceful, but they do have, so it's when you trap them, it's more about what's not causing harm to them. There isn't really much risk to yourself, other than, again, you want to not get scratched. But they have very poor eyesight, especially in the daytime. So you want to cover the trap, preferably with a heavier blanket. So again, avoid being scratched. Don't let the trap touch your leg. And release them by the base of a tree or the edge of the woods so they don't have to try to find their way to somewhere safe. Chickens, common problem here in Hawaii. We have feral kittens everywhere. And then anybody else who has to deal with feral chickens. They're voracious eaters of cat food. They're not the least bit afraid of the cats. And just the opposite, actually. It's the cats who are afraid of them. So there's a couple of ways to deal with them. Is they go to sleep, they roost at night around dusk. So trapping at night avoids issues with the chickens. But if we have to trap during the day and there's a lot of chickens around, what we do is get chicken feed, cracked corn, and we'll just put a big pile of it, 50 feet away from where we're trapping, and they'll go and eat that instead of the cat food. But do keep in mind, if you do trap a hen with her chickens, have to be very careful when you release them, because the hen potentially will be quite aggressive towards you. Another way to keep the critters out of your trap, similar to what we just talked about with the chickens, is to give them food they like more than cat food, and be generous about it, and keep them happy and away from your equipment. So with raccoons, you can see some of the stuff they like: corn. They like white bread, apples, marshmallows. Isn't that funny? The raccoons love marshmallows. Possum, bananas, apples, tomatoes, persimmons, acorns. Skunks like nuts, peanut butter, apples, bananas, and of course there's cracked corn for the chickens. So I want to wrap this up with a story about how this bag of tricks that you walk away with after today, hopefully, and the ones you have already, can be used in combination in really difficult, tricky circumstances. And so I want to kind of give you a case study of one that we dealt with. So this was, what you're looking at here is this giant rock wall. And the cat we were after is not. This is one of the longtime residents. You can see he's already fixed with his ear tip, but this is where the colony lived and hung out. They hung out in this very protected rock wall. And what happened was, we trapped a black and white, a feral kitten, maybe 9 weeks old, and it was just part of our regular maintenance trapping for that site. So we caught her and then released her back. It was a situation at that time on Maui. There was really no other outcomes for her. There was no one to socialize her. The shelter was full. They were already having trouble just placing tame kittens. Things have gotten better, but back then releasing her was really the best option. So we had her spayed. We let her go at the bottom of the wall, and she proceeded to climb up it and disappear. The next day, the feeder of the colony told us that he wanted to adopt her, but he was leaving in a few days for vacation, and he needed to have her at home with another kitten that he had before he left. So, we're dealing with a kitten we just trapped and just released and is feral. So we decided, look, we'll give it a try. We arrived about 2 days after we'd released her to try to catch her again. And when we got there, we found a large, recently emptied dish of wet food at the bottom of the wall. So now we know she wasn't hungry either. And, again, we couldn't get to her because of where she lived. So this is Lulu, and this is her when we spotted her hiding in the wall. So how are we going to trap this kitten under this kind of time pressure? So we decided, first of all, to trap during the middle of the day when it was hot out, because we figured the adults would all be asleep, and it would be the kittens who would be more likely to be active. So that would take away a lot of our issues, not having a lot of adult cats running around. So we stepped back, as we took a trap and we camouflaged it with the sunscreen netting, the green sunscreen netting, including on the floor. So we really worked hard to make the trap look as least like a trap as possible, since she'd already just been in one. We covered it with foliage. We baited it with sardines, which was something extra special she hadn't had before. And then we stepped back to see if we could spot her. And then we did, and that's her. As you can see, she was high up on the wall, a good, I would say, 20 feet up the wall, with the trap being down at the bottom of it. So we hoped she'd come down, interested in the sardines, but instead we could see her curling up to take a nap. So that wasn't going to work for us. So we took our laser pointer, and we call it the red fly, right? Because that's how they kind of play with it, like it's a red fly. And we ran the laser right above her head to try to catch her attention and get her not to go to sleep. We had no chance if she was sleeping, and some chance if we could get her to be active. So it worked in terms of catching her attention, and she started to chase the dot. But when we tried to, take the laser dot and run it down the wall, she wasn't having any of that. She was not interested in coming down. So next, what we did was we took out our phones, and we found a YouTube video of kittens meowing, and we put the phone at the very bottom of the wall, maybe a few feet in front of the trap. And then a few minutes later, we saw her come climbing down the wall, and moments after that, we heard the trap door shut. So we caught her. Today she's in her forever home with her fellow kitten, and it just goes to show you, what a bit of creativity and persistence can do. And if you have this bag of tricks and start to use them as you need them. Okay, so I wanted to let you know our next free webinar, that's or not the next one, but we do have a free webinar on colony caretaking tips and tricks, in addition to the drop trap webinar. Again, you can see the recording in the webinar archive on the Community Cats podcast page. So if you're interested in things like, feeding and health hacks and just basic ongoing colony care, a lot of tips and tricks just for that. This year, we also have introduced a series of webinars on what we call community TNR, and that's for folks who are interested in the program level. How do you organize a TNR program for hundreds or thousands of cats, and one that covers an entire municipality or county? And we go through the most successful approaches for that level of organizing. We've had one already, which was about getting the public mobilized and getting grassroots participation. You can watch that recording on YouTube. You can get the link, go to the Community Cats podcast website. And then in May, we have one coming up on targeted TNR, and in September on return to field. And just to let you know, there's a lot of us out here. Sometimes it feels very isolating to do this work if you're the only one that that's doing it and stuff, but do know that there are literally millions of us in this country, and more people are connecting online, and there are local Facebook groups. So do some searching, and then you're always welcome to join our communities. I know the Community Cats podcast has a online conference group where people who've attended the various events get together on Facebook. You're welcome to join our Facebook page as well. Email us if you want, and same with Stacy at Community Cats Podcast. So with that, Stacy, I'll hand it over to you. Maybe we have time for a few questions.
Super. Thank you, Brian. Excellent. As always, a fantastic presentation. Wonderful. Yes, we have whopping 4 minutes for a few questions. So first and foremost, the question that I want to bring up lots of questions around bait and using the different baits, the different types. How long, do you use only one bait at a time, and for how long do you give that bait a try and then try something else? Do you ever worry about sort of overstimulating the colony while you're using different baits?
Well, you put 2 kinds of baits in your bait dish, not just one, and make sure don't do 2 kinds of fish. Use fish and chicken. Use 2 very different ones, and then we'll put them out and just see what happens. You don't want to be continually changing, because then you're continually in the territory and potentially scaring cats away. So will change. It depends on the weather. If it's a hot day, maybe it dries up too fast, and so that will determine when we change the bait. You know, if it's been sitting out there for an hour, you might want to go and freshen it up, and at that point you might try something new. But usually during a trapping, we'll only change the bait maybe one time.
And then I wanted to get your opinion. I don't know the answer, even though we've known each other for years. So how long do you go trying to get that last cat, and have you ever had to give up on getting that last cat?
As long as there are cats around who are showing interest and there's something we haven't tried yet, we'll stick with it. You know, unless it's, you know, getting to be 3 in the morning, you know, 2 in the morning or something like that, and you just have to shut it down. Usually circumstances like who you're working with and where you're working kind of determine how long you have. But assuming that we can trap as long as we want to, we'll keep, like if we put out box traps and we've tried different tricks and different baits and they're not going in, then we'll break out the drop trap. And we'll see if they'll go under that. And if we've tried for 20, 30 minutes and they're just not having it, then we'll pack it up for the night. And, you know, ideally you have your caretaker continuing to withhold food so you can come back the next night. Sometimes you can't come back the next night. Sometimes you have to give it a little bit of time. So we don't ever give up on the last cat, but sometimes it does take a few different times to try to get them, and sometimes those attempts are spaced out over a period of time.
So you mentioned nighttime trapping. What percentage of your trapping time is daytime versus nighttime?
You know, a lot of that is going to depend on what the environment is like. So if there's a lot of nocturnal wildlife, then we're going to try to trap during the day. If there's a lot of daytime wildlife, like on Maui, there's a lot of mongoose that go into traps, and there's a lot of chickens that go into traps, and they're only active during the day. So there's more, if we're trapping in anywhere near a wooded area, it's going to be at night. Also depends on the weather. You know, if it's real hot, you're in a hot climate, you're probably going to either want to trap in the morning or after dusk. So I would say the number one factor that determines when we trap is when does the feeder feed. So if there's already a feeding pattern in place, we're not going to try to change that. We're going to follow the pattern that's already established. So that usually there is a pattern, and we've had to show up at 4 in the morning at a golf course because that's when the cats got fed. So that's usually the number one. If we can set up a feeding pattern ourselves, then we'll try to pick a time of day that's convenient for us.
But at this point in time, we are at the end of our session, and really appreciate everybody for being here. We have folks from all around the world. I'm just telling, I think we have Israel, we have Australia, looks like Bulgaria is out there. So not only are we in the United States, this is turning passion for cats into action all around the world. So I want to thank everybody. Brian, thank you. Susie and Kristen in the background, thank you so much. And we will see you all next time. Thanks again for turning your passion for cats into action.